Did you hear that as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had that earlier.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome. As part of my residency with the Regional Cultural Centre in Letterkenny, I've decided to have a series of conversations with people that I'm working with currently or have been working with over the last year or so. Part of the reason why I've decided to do this was that I've missed going to events a lot, but I have really, really missed the conversations that you have afterwards in the pub with your peers and your colleagues, and hearing all of the really interesting things that people have been up to. So I basically have decided to artificially create a space for these conversations. This is going to be a conversation with my friends and colleagues with Makina Books, who are publishing my book Glass in August this year. So I'd just like to introduce Robin Christian, who is the founder and editor of Makina Books, and Patrick Fisher, who is the designer at Makina Books, and Supriya Kaur Dhaliwal, who has just published a beautiful collection of poems called 𝗥𝗖𝗖 𝗩𝗶𝗿𝗁. So welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Put you all in gallery view now. Hello. So I'm just going to ask a few questions mostly about the process of creating books and the ideas that you have behind making books, designing books. So I'll start with you, Robin. So Makina, to me, seems like a quite unusual press. Through my time working with you, like, you have a really egalitarian approach to publishing, and I'd like to find out, like, when you had the idea of starting Makina, what were your motivations, and like what did you want to do with the press?
Okay, I think I started about 5 years ago, but I feel like that it was kind of a different phase of what the press is. But at that point, it was basically just because I'd moved to Glasgow and I was missing people, and I used to write fanzines when I was a teenager, and I loved that kind of post exchange you could do with books. So I basically started it for that reason. And then sort of fast forwarding 3 years, it wasn't really until I did Livia Franchini's book, which is the first thing that I did with Patrick as well, which is called Our Available Magic. I think that was kind of the point where the press started to take on more of an identity. I moved away from doing more photography-based books to working with poetry and prose, which is my other passion. And I think the goal was just like seeing lots of good work passing by digitally very quickly. So wanting to take something and slow it down and make a physical object of it, and kind of use the idea of publishing as a creative practice, if that doesn't sound kind of too ridiculous. So like, I used to do music and other things, and I wanted to try and channel something else into making books and leave that other stuff behind. It was a completely different challenge. So I just kind of wanted to put myself out of my comfort zone and see if I could, like, promote things that I think are really good and make nice objects, basically. Yeah.
That really makes sense, actually, with the books. Actually, this is Supriya's book, and they're like really, really. You put a lot of care and attention into making them. They're not really like a lot of other books. They have a really distinct feeling to them. I think your idea of them as objects, as something that capture something in a digital world, is really interesting. And I think it relates a bit as well to photography. Like, a lot of the books you published early on were photography. Is there something about like the object, like the book, that has something in common with the photograph for you?
Maybe. I mean, I think, so my background is photography and kind of research for exhibitions and books, and photography in a book was always my favorite way to consume photography. I just think it's a better, more intimate, slower way that you can take the journey. And I guess the thing that I've probably taken from that is, when you're putting an exhibition on, not putting all the photos at the same height in a row so people walk past them really quickly, thinking about a way of telling a story with images so that you're almost making kind of visual punctuation. And I think that I kind of took that idea, and then Patrick has kind of run with it in terms of like making, I don't know, like, yeah, thinking about the journey of a book. And I'm really interested in applying that kind of visual principle to written word. It's all storytelling, and yeah, thinking about the journey of the person reading the book and like how I read books, and yeah, just making it like, it's so much effort to do this, to basically, you might as well just do it as well as you possibly can. I think that's the thing, like make everything about it as good as it possibly can be to do justice to the work. And even though they're kind of becoming more of a format, it's always the work that dictates the book. It's never the other way around. It's not like we always use this paper and it has to be this size. It's you work with what you've got, and I don't want to fall into that gap of them all being kind of uniform. So yeah,
I think that's really interesting, because it sort of feeds into my idea of poetry as well. Like, a poem builds its own house, and the way that the books themselves are like something that's like the form of a poem. I think that's a really beautiful harmony. I think something as well at your project with audiobooks is really interesting to me, that you're not only thinking about how people read the book, but how they engage with it in different ways. Would you like to tell me a bit about your project with the audiobooks and audio descriptions?
Yeah, of course. So there's sort of twofold reason for doing it. So like, one is like my own appreciation of poetry. Like I love listening to poetry, and I love going to events where poetry is read, and I think like hearing the reader and their accent is really important. And I think that like lots of the literary world, you know, there's a problem with you know, there's not enough different accents, and you know, like I think poetry it can seem quite like, I don't know, like I think a lot of people think it's not for them, but I used to think that, and I absolutely love it. I'm always reading poetry at the same time as other things, and I thought, oh, you know, like with your book and Supriya and Naomi is from Birmingham, these are all great accents that I don't just want them written down, I want to record them. And then the other reason for doing it is purely from a kind of accessibility point of view. So I don't, like, even though we've just been talking about the object of the book, I feel like a book could be lots of different things. And I really like this idea of getting it to as many readers as possible to enjoy it. And that is one way of doing it. So you can have it, you know, recorded. We've got this person, Caroline, who's amazing and she describes art for a living. And so she's describing the book covers as an object. So it's the look and the feel of the book. And then we'll have that as a chapter with the poets reading the work. So I kind of think combined it will be, it's just a different medium, and I'm quite excited by it. So yeah.
I think it's really exciting.
Oh.
I have listened to some of those audio descriptions, and it's really like, it's really interesting to hear someone like narrate something that's so internal. I think it's really beautiful, and also they sound just really, really nice. I'm really excited about the audio project. I think it's such. I think there seems to be like a split between like poetry that's meant to be heard and poetry that's meant to be read in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's nice to find something in the middle that's, you know, it's like a harmony between the two of them. And I think hearing poetry is really valuable. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, so Caroline Dawson, she's doing the descriptions, but I think that I was kind of thinking about how, for me, the most exciting thing is having books in shops, because you don't know who's going to encounter them. And having a book, like I went to 𝗥𝗖𝗖 and Supriya's book is on the table in Harbour Books, and it's almost like that book is being exhibited like it was in a gallery, because it's on a table with all these other books. And you know, that's another way of presenting it that's great. So it really makes sense that Caroline is doing it, and I kind of hope other people will do a similar thing. I hope that people, you know, will think more about this. And you know, there's loads of more ways it can go. This is just the start, really. So yeah.
I think there definitely is a push towards that sort of accessibility, even on things like on TikTok. I don't know if anyone uses TikTok. Like there's like different voices that they use to describe things, and of ways of making things, and also captions and videos. Which it seems weird at the first time you see it, but then I think it's brilliant, like having closed captions and things, and being able to like access people that generally weren't able to access it, but also it being kind of beautiful and good. And
yeah, it's like, I don't think you can be perfect, but I think that you can, by thinking about these things, you know, like thinking we're going to organise these beach readings, and by just being really upfront about the access to them, maps, using icons, and just showing that you thought about it is really important, you know. Yeah. I think it's you know, even like ebooks. I've never read an ebook, but you might as well do them, because that's a widening your accessibility. Lots of people use a Kindle. They're cheaper, so there's that form of accessibility as well. And yeah, I think, yeah, all of these strands that could come out of doing a project, I think are really good. So
yeah, you might as well do them as well. I think I don't think there's any point in restricting yourself within the publication of books. Like, you can make something that feels quite transient and like going out in the world, and there is a value in that. But I think that making something that has so much care and attention and thought put into it is like so valuable. Yeah, I think that the projects you're doing at the minute are really great.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'd like to know, like, for Makina as a press, like, do you feel like you have an idea of what is a Makina author or a Makina contributor, photographer? Is there something that you have in mind whenever you choose people?
Well, yeah, I mean, no and yes, because it's, in a way, actually everything I've done, we have a submission window, but I prefer to approach people and ask them, because it's easier to kind of envisage what the project would be. And I think, I don't know, I mean, I just have a kind of, it's if it's something that I really like, and you know, I like working with a mixture of, you know, emerging writers and people who are more established, because I think that it's important to do that anyway, but that's also a really good way of maybe people buying both books, or people starting to collect all of the books that you're putting out is the kind of dream. Yeah, I guess it's hard to kind of put into words what it is I'm looking for. I'd say it's probably like on the more experimental side of things. I'm really interested. I don't see the point in just doing the same thing that someone else is doing. So that's one thing. And then, you know, I love like fragmented text. I love reading it and I love looking at it. So that's kind of, poetry really appeals to me. But it's not the only thing that we do. So yeah, sorry, I haven't really answered that question very well, but
it's a hard question to answer as well, because you have like a really diverse range of writers working for you. So it would almost reduce them to to lump them all together as being like, I think that they are, I don't know, they all have really nice hair. No, I think that's a really interesting like process that you have, and it feels nice to invest in something that's so worthy. I think as well, one of the things that I really love about Makina is the designs. I think that we'll move on to Patrick now, because this is an obvious like transition.
Segue.
Very true. I'm a professional. But I'd love to talk about, because I think those things all feed in together into like the design. I think that the attention to detail and the like doing something for the sake of doing it and doing it well is something that you can really see in the designs of the books. I wanted to ask you, Patrick, about what is your process when you're handed a manuscript? Obviously, like you're emailed a manuscript for a project. Like, what are the first steps that you take whenever you're considering the design?
Well, I guess with a lot of these, Robin will usually have had some response to it, or maybe there'll be some conversation he's previously had with the author sort of relating to elements of it. But I think what's probably quite good about this starting points is they're usually relatively abstract to a degree. It's almost like you could do something like this going down this. It's not so much, like let's look at a cover that looks like this. It's more just like more of taking some kind of, I don't know, iconography or a thread. And I guess sort of after that, I suppose recently, and I think all through it, there's been this concept with some sort of illustrative element on them. Whilst, we'll sort of come on to talking about text later and things, but I think that's a very important part that's like either born of or inspired from the title of the work. And I guess like, reading it and thinking about the sort of thematic feelings, but then that maybe informs how everything looks, but then maybe what is on the cover is just some representation, which could be some, shard of a line from it. And you take that and it seems to somehow summarize what the whole book is about. I think that's probably the initial steps to how I would think about, like, especially the cover designs. And I guess like generally the idea around all of the books that we've currently done together have been kind of that idea of intentionally eschewing sort of tendencies towards more conservative or like academic conclusions with like, book design. Within the written word, I think especially maybe poetry as well, there is a tendency that is almost to make it less instant in a way to people, because there is a academic nature sometimes to some of the design, or it's, there's an assumption that it's going to look a certain way, and that kind of is like an ongoing feed. It's almost like an assumption that a poet's like, well, my poetry book's going to look like a poetry book that I've seen in this poetry section, and that idea of saying that it doesn't have to do that, and actually it can be a lot more expressive and it can be a lot more personal, I think is something that's like really interesting. And like I can sort of talk about how we came to some of the things with some of the recent books if you want.
Oh, I'd love to. I'm like really into this, the cover of the 𝗥𝗖𝗖 𝗩𝗶𝗿𝘁𝘂. Something I just noticed today that on the proofs of my one as well, I noticed that in the flaps, the little island formation is inside the logo of the and I was like, that's very clever.
So that's I guess that's a nice sort of thing when we talk about like making everything its own individual thing, as Robin was saying, but like having these small elements that make it a series. So like the sort of Makina poetry logo on the front, and then that being mimicked. So almost like if you got the whole set, you'd have just rip them up and then make a nice collage out of them, which is not what we'd recommend doing.
Not until you read them, at least.
Exactly. Yeah. Give
maybe
them
purchase another.
Or just exactly. Post some more. So I think So with the 𝗥𝗖𝗖 with Supriya's book, like the concept of the map was like the thing that I think Robin's initial response to it was, and we sort of thought about it, and I was like, I really like that as well. And it came out of, which I think this is maybe from the original press release, I wrote it down here. It was a sort of that the book is a testament to the human spirit's drive to cross territory and forge a map of our own. But with that, because there's so much about transience and location within that, I didn't want to take something that was just like, okay, you know, we're going to do a map of this place specifically. So if you look at that map in detail, you'll see it's actually basically it's a composite of Ireland and India, but kind of like squashed, and compounded together. So I wanted to have a route, and maybe, you know, us three, now four, and the people who watch this will kind of work that out. But I think, you know, even those things within design are somehow important. Like it's definitely like a, you know, the concept of something niche, or that is like, you know, an insider knowledge. But I think you can do things that mean a lot that maybe aren't initially obvious. And like, so it's kind of like that dream like conflation of these weird things, like in your, you know, in within your dreams you go to places that are made up of multiple things within memory. And I guess it kind of is like a cartographic representation of that, I suppose.
God, yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. Like, I don't know, do you, like, I dream of places more than I dream of people or anything else. Is that like a normal thing?
Yeah. There'll be like a weird place like that is, what's my brother's one? It's like the 𝗥𝗖𝗖 shopping centre. He's like 90% of my dreams are in there in some way. There's like these weird things, you're like, why is that there? But yeah, I think the place thing is a real like repeater for some reason.
I wonder if that's like something about your psychology, because I suppose like it's like putting things in places. Like with poetry, I think like a stanza is a room. So it's like, I think you could sort of think about making a poem as like putting things in rooms and putting things in places, which probably relates to like design as well, like putting things in their place. So I wonder if it's like a specific type of person, and do like other people have like repetitive dreams about other things according to their psychology? I don't know.
Potentially, yeah. I see you mean with the, maybe it is, yeah. We'll have to look into that. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, we'll have to after drinks.
Yeah, exactly. That's like very late at night. Ooh.
I wanted to ask you about your colours. I find the colours really interesting. I know we had a conversation about the colour for glass. I was like fixated on this like 𝗥𝗖𝗖 𝗩𝗶𝗿𝘁𝘂, but I would really like to hear about the 𝗥𝗖𝗖 colors. Is it like, I don't know, see, I feel like I'm looking for the sources of your inspiration, but in the first poem, the meet me in no man's land, meet me in the morning, no man's land, it mentions like yellow and lilac.
I mean, there's definitely feelings in there that and I think we sort of covered that with when we discussed the typography, not so the stuff we ended up using, but there was like that representation of a westernized concept of India in some senses, which we kind of all found interesting in different ways. So like what you think of something as meaning, but you're taking it from the point of view where you have no actual like lived experience of that. And I guess with that on the whole, it was like the concept of vibrancy. So the actual, we had 3 or 4 palettes which kind of had those, I wouldn't say, the complementary colours in a sense, but that are both, each was as vivid as the other. I think there was kind of importance with that. And like in the context of the map itself, I think I always really liked in a lot of, old maps, I've got like, a book of those, and then, there's often things where the sea and the land are just, really strange colors, or even you can do that on like Google Maps. I always find that really interesting, that kind of thing of this thing which has these such distinct forms in our mind, green for land, blue for sea, but then like inverting those or using alternative colors, I think is kind of interesting. And I suppose it's like, again, it goes back to that, like the compound, something in your dream that isn't quite as it is in reality, or like the compounded thing of multiple places. It's that similar sort of concept.
Like the colors are kind of specific places that aren't necessarily where you expect, or
I guess so, but also I think there's a more fundamental thing about like, which is relates to the earlier stuff I was saying about what you expect from a book or a poetry book, or a book effectively that is prose or poetry in some way, that again the kind of brightness of that and taking it away from the academic and making it not this sort of sedate formal object but something that is expressive is kind of what leads me and Robin, I think, especially to be into those. I think we're naturally kind of into the primaries and the bright things, but I think, you know, it wouldn't be there as just a kind of like, just, you know, because that's what we're into. I think there's kind of this rationale that like supports it, definitely.
I think the thing about like the idea that academic and like poetry is like a serious thing, or as Robin was saying, is like not for them, for everyone, is quite interesting, especially in designs of books. Like I think now that I think about it, like books that are like serious poetry tend to have like blank covers, or like there's a move towards like unadornment in books in general as well. Like if the covers of like things that are, I don't know, sold to the mass market are more likely to be colorful or like cartoonish. I think it's quite interesting that subverting that in a way that's, because it's obviously extremely thought through.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely coming from a point of view of an opinion of what engages us or engages me. Like it's not, well, whilst I like the fact that it is the opposite of that, and it is making it feels more celebratory to me. I think I think that a lot of it is just because kind of that's the approach that I love, and like, you know, utilizing that with, you know, how we might approach different people's work is kind of what engages me, I suppose. But I think like, yeah, the priority is to support that. So like, definitely I'm not against more minimalist design. I think it's just like, it's just in this context or how I sort of naturally work, that's definitely going towards something that's more maximalist is like, yeah, where I would start.
I think there's definitely something really interested in that. Like, I do quite like minimalism in a lot of ways, but I do enjoy. I feel like I aspire to minimalism, but I sort of end up somewhere that's like slightly left of that. I wanted to ask you as well about this is like sort of like a geeky kind of question, but we had a bit of a discussion about typefaces, and I want to know. Typeface is one of the things I find really interesting at a distance, and I haven't been asked to actually really look into it as much as I'd like to. So I really like to learn about your approach to typefaces, because I've noticed that they have changed through the books. Like I think the earlier pamphlets were very like sans serif. Or this one's not. This has got serifs.
Yeah, but some of them were, yeah.
So you how do you approach like each book?
I think that's like definitely the voice, and it's definitely a representative of like, this one feels like this and this works. I think like, I obviously, you know, as I also a website designer, you know, it's a lot of similar considerations to that, in that similar sense of that representation of a kind of identity. So I think, yeah, I think the reason we've gone more towards these recently, I don't know, there is I think it's just kind of suited it, obviously, especially for like your book, like the that was one of the most enjoyable things in terms of like thinking about the interior typography, was that idea that we kind of got to use like a Georgian typeface or to understand all of those. And then I started off there, and I went with, I think, with Baskerville, and then, you know, I kind of understood the history of it, and then the more that I read, I understood the linkage, and I got to things. I put some notes about this, but like the kind of concept of like the grooved lettering, which became this thing in the end of the Regency period, because there's a thing called steel plate engraving became a commonly, you know, available and affordable thing, and so then it became really ubiquitous, because basically by doing this type of thing, the type of printing, it was much harder to forge things, so they became very prevalent in banknotes. So that's why it's like this thing which is irrelevant to now. You look at it and it's this beautiful decorative thing, but it has this weird like practical point in history. And what we ended up using for the front was, you know, for the word glass itself, was something that had that feel to it, which obviously feels Georgian, and it's kind of, well, it's because it is, but you wouldn't, you know, it looks elegant and all of these other things, but it actually doesn't really come from that place in a way. I found that really interesting to sort of go into.
I find like that's something that I find really interesting in things like architecture. Like, I think we have a tendency to look at like Victorian and Georgian buildings and think that it's all just like facades and adornment for like specific, for like just to make it look pretty. But whenever you look into it, it's like the consideration that goes into those buildings is like so. It's like everything is thought out because things were so unavailable and more available. So things like light was really important because obviously there was no electricity. So all the windows are designed specifically to increase the light and the space. But also there was the availability of like cheap labor and materials that they don't really have now.
Yeah.
So look, like I think I find it really interesting, like seeing like all the ways that buildings are constructed in different time periods, and it sort of lends itself. Then this is like the story that carries on into the book and into the typefaces and things. Like the functionality is so interesting, but you have to really search for it and really look for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of what you were just saying. That is really interesting. That it's kind of my classic thing in terms of looking at architecture and being like, why don't things look like this now? And I'm like, because they can't, because like those materials are simply not available at the etc. But it's a really interesting point about what you assume as adornment is actually function sometimes.
I think one of the places that really strikes me as being like that is Glasgow, because like I used to live in Glasgow, and Robin used to live in Glasgow, and like walking around looking at the tenement buildings especially, you sort of look at them, they're so beautiful, the ceilings are so high inside, like you have this like real like sense of space in them, and you're like, why don't people build them like that now? And it's like the reality of those buildings is they were in the prime of the empire, where you had all these tradesmen, you had access to all of these different materials that have like been totally used up, and I think it's like, I think about this stuff all the time. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like a thing. It doesn't have an answer, but it's like it's a fascinating thing to. I'm always it's there's no conclusion.
You don't get those tenements in other places though, do you? They're Scottish. It's like because it's my dream to live in one again, but I'm worried about the weather of Scotland. So.
Yeah, this is the thing. It's like it's you're paying, like you get like, if you contrast the architecture in say London, which is like Victorian terraces, or Belfast, Supriya, like the terraces in Belfast are so like pokey and tiny, and it's really interesting, all the motifs, like the things that hold them together. Like Belfast houses don't have proper kitchens for some reason. Like none of them seem to have like big kitchens, and then like in London, I guess it's because a lot of the architecture was like destroyed and stuff during the Blitz, so you have all these like little pockets of Victorian, but they, like the Victorian houses just do not compare to the tenements in Glasgow.
No, but most of the houses in London have been carved up into flats as well by like landlords, so that's like
that's what's happening in Dublin as well. I'm going to say that this is all relevant because my book uses architecture, so we're allowed to have this conversation about this. But in Dublin, they have all these grand Georgian houses that are just like being cut up and like cut up in ways that aren't repairable. It's really sad. But anyway, we'll move on from architecture back to design, which is basically the same. It's the same thing. Oh, I wanted to ask you, Pat, what are you planning on doing next?
So at the moment, obviously, there's ongoing things. Putting your book to print, and very soon, which is going to be really nice. And then, I think Robin probably can talk better about the Makina projects. But on the book front, I'm working with Pressbar Press on their first two titles, which are coming out in the autumn. And they've also got the forward book of poetry cover, which is a really exciting one, which is coming out in September. So that's not been it's not publicly out there yet, but I designed that last year, so I'm really excited for that to sort of be about. And then we're working with Robin on a lot of the Makina stuff, increasing the accessibility of the site, working on the new audio page. and that's going to be it's going to be a really like fulfilling thing to do, to sort of make that site as good as it can be. So that's what's going on with me.
It's exciting to see everything as it develops. I think it's been a real privilege to see everything from the first book, because Livia is one of my friends, so she was like the first one, and it's been wonderful to see everything develop. I'm gonna move on now smoothly to Supriya. Welcome, Supriya. I feel bad I like left you in the corner for it, but I'm really excited to talk about this book because I absolutely love it. This book is like a journey like around the world. Like, I don't know how you've managed to fit so many places into your life, never mind your book. So I wanted to start off asking about that, so you've lived so many different places, and you've lived all these different kinds of experiences. So I'd really like to hear how that has affected you as a poet. Like, how has this transference affected your work?
I think when I was writing the book over the years, I think I was doing it very unconsciously, because I was writing the book as I was living my life, and those cities were very much a part of my life. But now that I consciously look back and think of it, I think when I was putting together the poems or even writing them, I feel like I wanted to introduce a perspective that I seldom saw in the poems that were written by poets like me, or there's a lot of things that come into perspective here, like gender, nationality, and had I read such poems by other Indian women who were living abroad, who were like living in different cities, working in different cities, living so many lives? And the answer is no. I still struggle to find such work out there in the public domain, and there, over the last few years, it has changed in different ways, but I feel like there is still a lack of that aspect there. And I feel like when I am putting out a book like that, I am also normalizing living a life like that, which is rare for poets like me, because like I feel like, if you're there's so many books out there which are like, oh yeah, we lived for 4 months there, so, and we could live there, so it's like an experience of like a summer abroad, or anything like that. But like what I was looking for was like a collective thing, which I really wanted to produce myself. But I was also very lucky to be able to do that, because my work spanned so many different cities, so many different communities, so many different societies that I was a part of while I was studying, working, and just moving along my life. So yeah, and also like I feel like that also transitions the voice in a lot of poems. Yeah, like the I behind them is like a collective representation of someone who's lived, who's lived all the aspects that exist in the book, and how they have evolved as well. So it's like a journey of the self as well. It's hard to put it in a way that doesn't sound like the self-help way, but like it's not that, but it's something along the same lines. And yeah, so it's sort of like a collective representation of all that there has been.
I think I really like that idea, the collective, because my experience of like living in different places is that especially if you go to other places to live as opposed to just visit, you sort of do recreate yourself in each space. Like, it's something really freeing about just going somewhere else and creating a new life and then leaving again. Like, something I always find is like people love you more or like appreciate you more when they know that you're leaving. Is that I don't know if, like, what that says about my experiences, but I like this idea of like the I behind the poems is like a collective I, because there's so many different versions within it, different like contexts, different voices almost.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, and I'm just like trying to think of how it has evolved ever since like probably I wrote the first poem in the book, and how it has come along a long way. But I also feel like there's so many other external factors that contribute to it. Like politically, so much has happened over the last few years, all the years I was writing that book. So like Meet Me in the Morning on No Man's Land, it's like clearly fictitious description of whatever's going on there, which is also the first poem in the book. But I think when I wrote that poem, I was living in Belgium, and I was in Belgium only for the summer, but I was living in Dublin at the moment. So when I came back to Dublin, and coming back to Dublin was very much like, you know, looking at news all over again. Brexit was all over, and I was like thinking of Brexit in terms of the partition of India and Pakistan and all those things. So a lot was going on in my mind. I've talked about this before a lot of times but I feel like if I wrote that poem now, it would change so much. And because the political situation is so much different. So I feel like a lot of external factors also contribute to it, and probably the pandemic's still dominating our life now. So I feel like this I would be so much different than the I that's in the book already.
Yeah, there's a real feeling of, yeah, it is interesting to think like if you could go back and rewrite different poems now. I think that's one of the beautiful things about poetry, and one of the difficulties of it is like that a poem in a book is something that's like captured like in time. It's like a photograph as well. It's like something that's captured, but you like kind of always want to go back and change it, but you can't. Or some people do.
Yeah, some people do in different versions. I'm thinking of Derek Mann. Well, there's this poem, I'm forgetting which one it is, but he uses like a curse word, and he changes it in every draft. And it's just like, it's insane. Yeah. How it has evolved over decades or years. But gives literary criticism a new perspective. The academics have got some serious work to do there.
I think I remember, I wonder if you must have done the same class as I did on the MA in Belfast on him.
I think so, yeah.
It was such an interesting idea, this idea you could go back and change things. I think it's great. Yeah. Some people are like, no, you shouldn't do that. I'm kind of for it. I'm like, do whatever you want. It belongs to you. You might as well. Yeah. If you don't like it anymore, you can change it. It's kind of like going back to like your wedding photos and like sort of editing it out, or like changing the person, like, shove another person in. One of the things that I find really fascinating about your book whenever you talk about it is talking about Nora Richards and that like connection with India and Ireland. I want you to tell me as much as you can about her in like the shortest space of time.
So I will, before I tell you about like who Nora Richards is, I think it is really interesting how Nora Richards became a part of my life, because when I was growing up in my hometown, Palanpur, which is next to the village where Nora's house is, I always knew who Nora Richards is. I think I feel like I always say it to people that I chose to study Irish literature on master's level because I had a crush on Beckett. But now that in retrospect, if I look back, I think Nora Richards was my introduction to Irish literature when I was very, very young. And I always sort of like knew about her that, you know, like there has been an exemplary figure who once lived in the middle of nowhere in the mountains and like did amazing work here. But when I came to Dublin, that changed because people didn't know who Nora Richards was. And even when I was like studying Irish literature, Irish drama at the uni, there was no mention of Nora Richards anywhere, and that really made me think that I really need to explore that a lot. And I myself really want to know more about Nora Richards. So I had been trying for many years to develop a project, and I sought support from different organizations, universities, to back me up that this thing I'm going to do is not as crazy as it sounds, and like I'm going to do it. But it didn't happen until the Charles Wallace Trust really supported it this year for their residency at the University of Kent, which was really cool because I feel like this is the first, even though I've been thinking latently about my project for so many years, this is the first time I've actually sat down seriously to do it, and it has been really great. But like who Nora Richards is, the period when she lived here was actually the period of the British rule in India, and there were a lot of people like her who were living here, mostly artists who were wives of husbands who were posted here in the army and stuff like that. But I feel, and Nora, that's how Nora first came here. But she just decided, after her husband's death, she just decided on to stay here and just never went back. But I feel like how she stands out from all those other people is like how well liked she is. Like I even in like there are still like generations after generations have come where, you know, I know people whose grandparents have not knew Nora personally, or, you know, generation after generations have come forward, and there's so many interesting anecdotes that I come across every time I'm trying to talk to a new person who has had some connection with Nora. And also the kind of work she did. I think she was really good with languages, and she was an actress as well, so she had acted in plays written in local languages, written in Hindi, written in the local dialect which is spoken here, and she was also writing in those languages when she was like engaging herself with the community here. I think English was never her primary language when she was working with the community here, which is very interesting. And there's like not enough material, which as much as I would like to engage myself with, like, you know, there are some recordings, but there are only a few. She did that on daily basis. Like there's a little amphitheater near her mud house in 𝗥𝗖𝗖, which is the village where she lived. And like she did stuff there on regular basis. And there's very little documentation of that. And most of it's documented in her memoir, Country Life, which is out of print, exists only in a few places. It exists in National Library of Ireland if you want to go see it, and the British Library as well. But yeah, there's limited access to it, and it has not been printed since many years. So yeah, she's amazing, and I am, as I discover more about her, I'm just more amazed every now and then. There are archives, not just archives, at Punjabi University Patiala, who sort of, like, I think they gave an honorary degree to Nora Richards back in the day, and Nora was really struggling because she didn't have any family, she didn't have any children. She had like a few cousins and who were living in the Netherlands, but like that also sort of fell through. She couldn't like hand over her estate to them, but like she was really struggling how to hand over property to anyone, like in her old age, when she was like she really needs support to do more work there. So she sort of gave it all to Punjabi University Patiala, and they are the ones still doing stuff at the amphitheater. Like they still bring teams. Like I think that has not happened in a couple of years, but it happens on a frequent basis. You know, teams come, they do plays here. Like, you know, it's like sometimes it's like a mini festival, and they have a few of Nora's archives, and I was going to go access them when the second wave hit us. So as soon as things calm down a bit, I'm really excited to see what they have. I'm really excited to see if they have any pieces of clothing, especially because like she did, like, I'm like always interested in that aspect of things latently, and also like because like so she did so much theater work, and there's like this beautiful description of the clothes, the kind of clothes she wore in her memoir, and I think I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested to see if I can get access to different drafts of a memoir, and also like you know, all those like weird things like her notebooks and stuff like that, whatever I can get my hands on. I don't know how much is there, but there is something there. Like there is no online log of, you know, like I don't know why it's like so hidden, but it's there, it's somewhere there, and like I'm excited to see like where that takes me. Maybe it'll give me access to go to more places to look at more stuff. But that's definitely a start.
She sounds so interesting, and she also, like, I think that there is a massive trend in Ireland towards sort of obscuring women artists.
Yeah.
This is something I've been looking into recently, and like there's so many incredibly important Irish artists that have just been ignored, like Mamie Gillette and Mary Swansea, who are just sort of like pushed to the side in favor of male artists. I love what you're saying about the clothes and the fabrics, because the house that I'm in now used to belong to an art historian called Anne Cruikshank, and there were like little objects left behind in the house. A lot of them were actually from India, because she lived there.
You sent me a picture of a notebook once.
Yeah, there's loads of like mad things in the house, like, but one of the things that I found was like a box of fabrics which like a lot of them are like offshoots of like things that I think she must have made a lot of her own clothes and like different, there's like there's saris and like different silks and embroidery, and like a lot of it like it's really beautiful and some of it's quite damaged, but I think it's really interesting having the like she'd saved offshoots from different things that she made, which is like kind of a shadow of a piece of clothing that exists. So like I'm really interested to see what you find. I know it's such a niche thing, like finding the
it's like woman. I don't even know what to expect, but like if I can get a little glimpse into what they're like, I would be the happiest person on earth.
I can't wait to see what you make out of it. I think
I hope that trip takes place soon, like because things got so bad here, and like my state like closed its borders, so also universities are shut, everything's shut at the moment, but hopefully when things get better, like that's the first thing I do, I think.
It's like I think it's the unknown about it as well. It sounds really interesting. Like where is it going to lead you?
And also like academically, I think there's a lot's been written on Norwich's academically, but like whenever I read it, it's so repetitive. Like I feel like all the archives that are there, I have not seen their representation in any kind of work, not in creative work, but not in academic work either. So someone needs to take out those boxes if they exist.
It sounds like you might be a good candidate to go and dig through them. Something interesting about that as well is the languages that she wrote predominantly in different languages, and I think there's something I wanted to ask you about as well. Like as an Irish writer, I think there's an awareness of being detached from your native tongue. Like my Irish is terrible, but I have like a sort of constant like sense of guilt, like in the background about not being able to write in Irish or not being able to communicate properly. So I wanted to ask you, like, how did you feel about like you mentioned language quite a lot in your collection, like how do you feel like writing through these different languages? How does it affect the nature of your work?
I feel like when I was going to school and learning different languages, there were like I spoke Hindi perfectly, I speak Hindi perfectly, I speak Punjabi perfectly, but I feel like when it came to writing in these languages, I feel like I don't know, if I unconsciously place myself in a position when I started to just write poems, like there was no way I was going to do them in those languages because of the kind of education I was getting. I feel like it's just like a post-colonial reality growing up in India at this moment, that like, English is the language you learn the best, and the other languages just come along with it naturally. And and I feel like when I started to do it in English, I just kept on doing it. But now that I look at it, I feel like it also gives me a bit of a leverage to look at my own work from an outsider's perspective, because there's so much to explore there. I feel like I don't have any sort of relationship with any language that I really want to claim that language as my own. I just don't feel like that for any language, because my attention has been so divided among so many languages for all my life. So that sense of ownership, I just don't have it. So like I've said this before a lot of times, but every language for me is a kind of a foreign language. So even English is a foreign language, yes, but when I'm writing in it, I feel like I make it my own when I'm writing it. But when I'm looking at it, I have that leverage because it's on my mother tongue to like look at it from an outsider's perspective.
That's quite interesting, actually. I hadn't really thought about it like that. I think writing in would you consider it your second? I suppose you don't really. Do you hold them all equally?
Third language probably, because like my parents are from Punjab, so we always spoke Punjabi at home, but we don't live in Punjab, we live in a neighboring state, and people speak Hindi here. No one speaks Punjabi. So yeah, those two languages come out more in the public domain, and then comes English.
It's really interesting. I wanted to just share the story of how we met. I think it's like really...
Yeah, it's so interesting. Oh my god, it's the best story. Go on.
I'll start it off and then you can continue. Okay. So
Okay.
about 2 years ago, or a bit over 2 years ago, I went
Over
to,
2 years ago, yeah. It's been over 2 years.
what is time? I
Yeah.
mean, the last couple of years are pretty elastic. But anyway, over 2 years ago, I went to India on a residency, and I took a notion, as you do. I was down in New Delhi to go up to 𝗥𝗖𝗖 because my friend told me to go up there to see if I could see the Dalai Lama. So I got on actually I was asking, I posted a tweet about trying to work out the best way to get there, and you recommended that I got the bus.
Yeah, with the overnight bus, because you were going to take a train, and nobody does that here. There's no train that comes here.
I got the bus, but I had a weird experience on the way back. But so you tell me, like, where you emailed me then.
Yeah, then I was 𝗥𝗖𝗖 where Emily was going to come is the neighboring city to my hometown, and it's like a 40-minute drive from here to where the Dalai Lama lives, where Emily was going to go. But Emily was going to take the train to Pathankot, which is like the last train station near our hometown, but it's like 200 kilometers away. Then like, how are you going to come here for those 200 kilometers? Like, you were going to take a bus or something, or a taxi, I don't know. But it felt like an extraordinary stretch. So I recommend her take a flight or like take an overnight bus. And overnight buses are actually fun because you sleep through your journey and you just board them from a city and you wake up in a different city. I think they're amazing. So yeah, Emily did that. And like, yeah, it was so exciting. I was sitting in Belfast at that time, and Emily was in my hometown, so I was looking at my hometown through Emily's eyes. So it was also a beautiful time of the year. There was snow on the mountains and like really sunny, wintry days.
It was freezing.
Yeah, it was very cold though. Yeah.
Oh, I had to go and buy a yak scarf because I got there and I hadn't anticipated. I obviously wasn't very good at planning. I hadn't anticipated how cold it was going to be, and I had to like go and buy clothes. Try and warm up. It was so cold. It was so beautiful though. It was something.
And we went to my favorite cafe where I love to go, and where I'm dying to go at the moment, but everything's closed. So maybe soon.
It's a nice cafe. It was just perfect.
I haven't been there in years now. I think it's been like 3 years. Maybe the last time I was home, or maybe the time before that. That was when I went there. Yeah, I haven't left the house much ever since I've come home this time. But yeah.
It was so. I was thinking about this earlier as well, about where you're from. Is like, it feels so high up above everything else.
Yeah.
It's like a really extreme feeling. Like you feel like the air just feels like really like thin, or like
like especially if you're coming from New Delhi. Yeah, it's a drastic change. Yeah.
But I think that like there's something about that environment that reminds me a little bit of Ireland, especially the west of Ireland. That feeling of like being on the edge of an expanse. Is something really similar, and it's like feels quite extreme. I wanted to ask you as well, how did you? Well, I suppose you ended up in Ireland through Nora Richards, but I want to know, like, what was it about Ireland and its beautiful landscape and people that that made you want to be here?
It was quite random. I was really interested. So I first came to Dublin as a student, as an MPhil student at Trinity, and I studied Irish literature there. And I was thinking what to do after my undergrad. That seemed like a wise choice. And then once I got accepted, I was like, yeah, that's definitely happening. So that was the first step. But then I just went on to live there. I worked for a bit after that. But then in 2018, while I was working, I was one of the poets selected for Poetry Ireland introductions, and most of the people who were on that program were from Belfast doing the poetry MA at the Seamus Centre, and I was like, yeah, I could do that. They seem cool. So I applied. I got in, and I was like, yeah, so I'm moving to Belfast now. So yeah, that's how I was in Belfast. Back to school again.
I think you might as well. Like I love the masters in Belfast.
Yeah, it was great, and I think it was also great that we did it in the pre-pandemic era.
Yeah,
I don't think it's the same if you're doing it now. Yeah.
But I think Belfast is a really interesting place because it's like a small city, but it has like a really strong poetry scene.
Yeah, for a long time, the only people I knew in Belfast were poets. I knew a lot of people, but all of them were poets.
It's free. You could just live and only talk to poets in Belfast.
Yeah.
Free.
The dogs are backing me up.
I think we'll have a little bit of a group discussion because we have a couple of things that I'd like to talk about, and then we're going to have a poem from Supriya from the collection. First thing I wanted to ask everyone, like, how do they feel about a book, like a poetry book? Because I think there's an inclination to divide it up into like pamphlets and chapbooks and collections and like things that have different weights almost. But I kind of like, I've noticed like with Makina, like attention to detail is like across the board, like each thing is an object. So I'd like to know just like how you feel about books as objects.
Should I go first? Well, it's funny, like I can't remember where I heard you talk about this, Supriya, but you, on a podcast, you were talking about these terms, pamphlets and chapbooks. And I loved what you said. I punched the air when you were saying it because I was so happy, because although these terms are really useful, they're also kind of restrictive as well. So, for example, there's this thing, Michael Marks Award for pamphlets, but if you want to enter it, your pamphlet's got to be, I think it's like 30 pages or less, including the cover. But there's so many things that I've done where I feel like it should fall into that category that are not eligible. And when, like for both of you, when we were talking about doing books, there was no like stipulation on, I'm going to do a pamphlet, it has to be this size. It was that I wanted to do a project with you that was going to be a book, and I would have done it and we would have worked with it in any way. So I guess it's, I don't know, you fall into these terms. So like for Supriya's book, we talk about it in marketing terms and call it a collection. It is a collection, but it's a book. And, it's like each thing has got the same value to me. So I don't know, like, and I love reading small things and bigger things, and each has got an advantage. And all I can say is that and I think Patrick will probably say the same, we put the same amount of effort into each thing. So it's the thing that is important and the work, and not necessarily the label. I don't know what else to say other than that. I think I do think these terms have got a use, but I wouldn't want to like restrict people to saying they could only submit a certain length thing. I'd rather they came up with that part first. I think that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, things kind of like are the size that they want to be. I think if you're artificially constricting or adding on, in some ways it's you're losing the integrity to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, me and Patrick are working on something at the moment, and for later in the year, and it's poetry, and it's one long piece, but to me it's also kind of a bit like a play, and I don't know how you would describe it, but it doesn't really matter. We're just gonna we're like, it's interesting.
I think the terms are definitely interesting, and historically have their own really interesting histories, but I think them being used, as Robin was saying, to like define what something should be. I suppose if you look at it in terms of, I guess, like music as a kind of concept of how that has evolved, like that is really based on volume and size. So like a 7-inch can hold so many songs, or that many minutes of music, or like an LP can, but the kind of, there's still those things that exist around that within what something is. But I don't think like that idea of something being a finite length, and in that not being practical, and then that not giving it a status, or giving it or somebody viewing it in a different way because it's defined as something, I think is an interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry, you go, Emily.
Oh, I know I was just gonna say like that idea of labels is like really being broken down now. Like books that are called novels or like not like I think of Cata Scanlon's 𝗥𝗖𝗓 𝗩𝗶𝗿𝗁. I don't know if you've read it, and I think it's defined as a novel, but it's like just little fragments. I think like I think you can put labels on anything you want, and it has an interesting effect, but it's not necessarily the label itself that holds the value.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, I guess from the writer's point of view, maybe there's more freedom in doing something that feels more like what you would call in music, like an EP or whatever. You know, like the smaller thing, you're working on the album, but you've got the smaller thing, and maybe you can take more risks with that thing. Or
I think in that sense, those specific names are useful in the sense that if it provides freedom, that's really cool. But you know, maybe the point is that you should be taking risks all the time and not being like, okay, I'm gonna sell out and make my commercial album collection.
Yeah. And as poets, I feel like if you have been like in the position that you know your work's been in a few magazines and stuff like that, and also if you are doing a creative writing program or anything like that, you are always supposed to publish something smaller when you get out of that program, not something big. And seldom do people publish like full-length books after that, because there's like a notion that you're not there yet when you are still at that position and you need to keep working. But whatever you have, you can like condense it into a pamphlet. And I was thinking about this a lot when I was putting together this book. And I feel like the finish and the first draft to Robin, I was like, I was happy with everything that was in it, but I was also like, I wasn't sure that what length we were aiming for, because we weren't aiming for, there were no rules, we were just like sort of working on a project. But I was also like, I was constantly thinking that if I have to lose a few poems, which poems would they be? And luckily we lost nothing out of like the main draft. We just worked with the thing we had, and I was really happy about that. But I don't think there is this freedom that exist in like the industry if you're just like looking forward to publish your work, because also like there is like a cultural divide. I think people in the UK and Ireland approach it different from people in the USA and different communities. Like here in India, I think there's no concept of pamphlet and chapbooks at all. But and when like a smaller work reaches the US, it becomes a chapbook. When it reaches UK Ireland, it becomes a pamphlet. And I feel like there's a big cultural divide there.
Yeah, I never know. I always thought maybe like a pamphlet, it was to do with the binding as well. That maybe like a pamphlet could be stapled or saddle stitched, and the binding. I don't know. I mean, like with your book, Supriya, as well. I think it's the sections that you made, the 4 sections, and kind of the space within them is so important, and the way that you could read one section independent of the others, or you can read it all in one go, and it kind of they're all linked. And I think to kind of pull that apart and try and make it really small would have sort of, I don't know, it would have just completely changed it into something completely different. Whereas if somebody sent me, I don't know, it doesn't really work like this, but if someone said, here are my 15 best poems, but there wasn't any kind of, you'd have to work with how you were going to bring them together and making a theme and like how they're going to sit together in a book, but it wasn't like that. And the same with yours, Emily, does the kind of the architectural theme running throughout, and that ties everything together. And I think that it's that kind of imagery that Patrick's created on the front, and I think it's I don't know, I think it's like it's the gaps, kind of what I was saying earlier, like the white space, once you've handed the work over and then we start working on it together, it's how do you put the pauses in, how do you like the rest pages, all of these things are so important. And you know, I think that Patrick's so good at doing this now because of it's not like working with an essay or some fiction where, you know, but the line breaks are so important and everything is there for a reason, and you have to respect that, and that's why we've done things like turned the prose on its side sometimes so that you don't have to, and not only does that keep your work there, but it also kind of makes the reader do something. They have to turn the book on its side, and I like that. So, you know, it's I
guess it comes to like intention. I think that the white space thing is really interesting because like when you're counting, but for those different prizes and categories, the white pages count as well, which I think is quite interesting in that like it's not necessarily the volume of poetry, it's the volume of the book itself, which I think like white space does have an active part within poetry. Like Supriya, I wanted to ask you like with your book, because there's like the different alignments and different spaces within the poems and the pages. Like what were you thinking about when you made the formations like that?
I think there are different ways of approaching it, and mostly it's different for different poems. But like when I do it in my practice, it's mostly like the moment in which it's like about, for me, it's a lot about placing time when I'm writing the poem. So when I'm writing the poem in the present moment, but I am referencing something from the past. From the past could be like from like a year ago, from 6 months ago, or from like 100 years ago. There's like a big gap there. Like this is something I struggle with, but I am also very interested in playing around with it. That is like how it plays time in the poems. But if I use those gaps to fragment those memories, if that is a good way to put it. And sometimes it's just a break between movements to leave the space for the reader to interpret, or even for the poet, the I in the poem, to transition from one movement to another, from one stanza to the next, something like that. And yeah, sometimes it's just like, sometimes the movement's so loaded that space is needed for to let that movement breathe. So I think there are different ways of doing it, but I think I mostly approach it in my poems to fragment those memories from like different time periods, from like the moment I'm writing the poem, from the two moments that I was thinking of and I was like actually writing it.
I think that idea of like the movement being loaded is really interesting. I think like as well, I think because you have some prose shaped poems in this as well, like I think it is quite interesting how you function when you're writing those different shapes. Whenever like such a huge idea of poetry is in the line and like that breath, and I think it's really interesting to subvert that, and that like the movement has to come from elsewhere when you don't have those line changes.
Yeah, and also it's like, I feel like this continues on. I had this discussion long ago with someone, but like, why are you writing in couplets at all? Or why are you writing in tercets at all? And I think it's very interesting because when you have the poem in front of you, there's so many ways that you can do it. And you could just like not do it in any way and just leave it out like that. But like, it's very interesting, like how different people approach their practice and how they go on about it.
What about you, Patrick? How do you feel about when you're designing?
Yeah, it's
about the white space.
It's challenging, and it's like it's really interesting part of it. And I think one of the things I guess about this format is it's slightly oversized, it's slightly boxy, so like you naturally, where's the most obvious, it's very good thing to show the two things, but yeah, if you look at something like that, the way that falls is with a natural amount of space to its left or to its right, which you probably wouldn't get in a sort of more squashy format. So you kind of start off with those intentions of space, and then initially maybe the way that a lot of people write is probably on to translate something onto a computer, and then you're looking at basically like the standardized A4 page, yet that's going to be transported into a much smaller thing. So what I've kind of come to the conclusion that actually I like the challenge of when it pushes it outside of the margin, because it's almost like saying, well, like with in Supriya's book, there's probably 3 or 4, maybe 3. I want, you sort of naturally want to have standardized formats for these things, but obviously each poem is different. So you're both expressing line breaks in different places, or indentation and all of that stuff, but at the same point, when a line is long and that is impactful, the fact that it looks totally different to the poem on the following page is intentional, and it's almost like that's more interesting by having the default amount of space around it. So if everything has a lot of space, and suddenly when it doesn't have space, or it's rotated to fill that thing, it changes how you perceive it, I think. And I've come from full circle, I guess, from thinking, oh, that's really challenging thing to do, to actually kind of celebrating that and being interested in when that happens, because it's like, I don't know, it's almost, you get a lot of with how a line breaks standardly in prose, you're in control of that as a designer the majority of the time, and then suddenly you're not, and that's like a kind of I think it's really a really interesting thing to work with, and then to sort of have to find a way to make that work, and this, rather than to compromise the kind of ideals of like, or the reasons as to why a line is a certain length, etc. Yeah.
I think that's like interesting about like almost problematizing the publishing. Like it's and I think that's when it comes in, the idea of like collaboration as well is really important. Like my overall feeling of working with Makina has been like that it is a collaborative process. Like the design is so important to the integrity of the book, and everything that goes into it is really like a huge part of the object that's made, and the object itself as well, with the audio and everything else that comes with it, is so much bigger than what it could be if it was just sort of printed off, like in some ways that doesn't pay attention.
I feel like sometimes we'll never know. I'm remembering the edition of Anne Carson's The Beauty of the Husband that I have. It's a UK edition by Cake Poetry. It has 8 to 9 blank pages in the end. Why? And is it just my edition that has it, or is it like also like across the Atlantic they're selling it like that? Sometimes we'll never know.
It's funny, isn't it? I think what you were saying about like the collaboration, it's, I don't know, I can't speak for Patrick, but it keeps it interesting in terms of like learning. So like the Prod, we're totally learning with each thing. Each book is completely different, and to take that collaborative element out of it would just make it like you were project managing a book. Here's the book, Patrick designed a book, I'll sell the book. It's sort of it's not very interesting. It's you'd get tired of doing that. And just sort of picking up from what Patrick said before about the format, it's not to be snooty at all about kind of A format books, but I guess what we were doing before was A formats, and the idea for the pamphlets, and now Supriya's book and your book and Rebecca Tamash's book, was this medium format photo frame, which is like the same as a large format camera. So it's like a 6:7 boxier frame, which lots of people say is like the most attractive. It's kind of like the way your eyes would see a photograph when if you were, it's like true to sight. And there is something very attractive about that kind of 6:7 format. So that's kind of why we used it, because the name of the press is named after a camera that takes that format. And it was just like a way of making more space on the page and making the books, like commercially, I keep getting told they should be the same size as other books so that they fit on the table in Waterstones. I kind of think that's changing now, but I want them to look different than the other books. So it's
definitely, yeah.
I think they're beautiful objects. I really love the idea of the medium format and the harmony between all the different concepts. I think we're running out of time. I think the conversation has filled it's time that it's like wants to, or I don't know how to link it into the conversation. This is not a pamphlet size conversation. I think we're gonna end on a poem by Supriya, but I think I'd love to say thank you to all of you for coming here virtually and talking to me, and I think it's been a really interesting conversation. So thank you, Robin, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Supriya. And would you like to end on the poem? I'm going to pin you, Supriya.
Yeah, and thank you for having us, Emily. It's been very lovely. I will read a poem from the book. It's called Reading Natalia Ginsburg in East Cork. Words fail me often, and so do shoes. I always keep a pair ready, polished in an empty suitcase, like an air ticket, without a return date, purchased on a whim. I wear them only on uncomfortable occasions, for when I'm feeling most comfortable, I long for the worn-out sneakers I've been wearing every day for hundreds of days, trusting them the most to keep my feet warm and dry, to keep my gait pronounced like an athlete's or ballerina's. It is too much to ask for, perhaps from something lifeless, summoned by all the burdens of the living. At the edge of this forest and the tree-lined avenues of a city where I have not yet been able to go, reside some little virtues, and there we can ask for everything that the heart needs, and there we will know it would have been the best if we came in a most worn-out shoes. Thank you.
Thank you.